Welcome back to Active Ingredients, the leadership series for people who build, scale, and shape the future of life sciences. I'm your host, Tom Dove, founder and CEO of Fraser Dove International, the life sciences talent consultancy. Today's guest is Abbie Celniker, one of the true builders of modern biotech. Abbie has operated at the highest level across science, company building, and investment. From early scientific roles at Genentech through to leading biologics at Novartis, CEO roles at Taliesin and 11 Biotherapeutics, and now as a partner at Third Rock Ventures. She's helped shape companies from idea to impact. She's built teams, scaled organizations, navigated acquisitions, and now focuses on creating and developing the next generation of biotech companies. She does all this with a strong belief in culture, diversity, and leadership that puts the team first. This episode is about what it really takes to build in biotech from the early days of the industry through to today and how leadership hasn't evolved over that time. Abbie, welcome to Active Ingredients.
Thanks, Thomas. Really happy to be here.
Perfect. Thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed our conversations before, and I know that you've had some conversations with people in my business as well. And I just really wanted to kick things off by understanding more about your leadership values and understand what your 3 active ingredients are of leadership and why.
Well, I think the first thing is authenticity. I really believe in the importance of having a kind of relationship where the people you're leading understand who you are and understand that they can trust you. And I think that that's my second big core ingredient is engendering trust, creating trust, demanding trust, so that you have the opportunity to really lead with that authenticity and basically ask your teams to do the same thing. And then I think at the end of the day, the third would really be culture. I think that if you can, especially in our business, develop a culture of innovation, which is a risk-taking culture, and really promote people's desire and incentive to take the kinds of risks that will translate into innovative and transformative technologies. I think that it's a different kind of culture, but it's absolutely critical in order to move forward in the industry that we're in.
Yeah. And your authentic self is one that would take risks, right? So
Absolutely. Yep.
so you embody these values, but let's talk about when you were kind of pre-university and then coming through deciding what you were going to do from a career standpoint. Were there any signposts or directions that you would go on to have a career in biotech building and executive leadership?
I think that there were probably early signs that I was going to be sort of a scientist, that there was always experimentation, whether it be in the kitchen or whether it be, outside in the mud. It was just always doing something, finding, bugs or whatever. So I think we knew that I was going to be a scientist at a pretty early age. As far as the leadership, I think that my parents would probably reflect on the fact that I really was a bit demanding in getting my way. so, so I think that that was something that I was pretty confident about. I didn't shy away from pushing my agenda, put it that way. But I do think that when I hit high school, my teachers sort of understood that I was um, not pushing myself as hard as I needed to, and that I had a lot more capability than they were seeing me exercise. And so I had one guidance counselor, who sort of took me under her wing and said, let's give you a customized program. Let's get you out of here a couple months, if not a year early. And let's make sure that you're taking the kind of courses that are going to push you in the direction that you want to go. And I was really lucky. It was a public school, and they really helped me create this program that got me into university quicker and got me really entrenched in the sciences when I was in high school.
Love that. So somebody really could see that in you back then.
Yeah, I guess so. Either that or she was trying to save me from self-destructing. I don't know.
But the curiosity, the assertiveness, the confidence, these are all good things to have from a leadership perspective, and skills that obviously you had inside, and then it took the opportunity that somebody else could give you just to unlock that. So
Yes.
then you went to university, and is that when you started to understand more about the industry, or was that still a little while away?
That was still a little while away. I did my undergrad at University of California, San Diego, which at the time was a pretty small undergraduate university. It had a larger graduate program. It was very research oriented, so it helped me understand that there was a definite trajectory to be a professional scientist, and that you didn't just have to be a doctor. That was a lot of what people did when they went into the sciences, become pre-med, which I was sort of toggling between the two during my time at UCSD, but really great exposure to different kinds of sciences, applied sciences, a little bit more of an engineering bend on some sides of things, which then made me pretty interested to continue on the scientific route when I went to graduate school. I still wasn't sure when I graduated if I was going to try to go to med school or try to go to graduate school, and wound up being lucky enough to have a good family friend who was doing a sabbatical at the University of Arizona in a molecular biology graduate program. It wasn't a department, it was an integrated department across the medical school and university there. And he said, look, it's a win-win. You could do both if you wanted to. And he said, there's not really an MD PhD program, but the graduate students do take some of the medical school classes and you get this exposure. And for me, the molecular biology part was so interesting because that was something that I'd started to see a lot of when I was at UCSD. This was early days of molecular biology.
Yeah.
And that to me felt very applied. And I did have a tendency to be more interested in the applied sciences than in the basic sciences. So it wound up being an absolutely perfect program. And it's just crazy when they always say whatever, luck favors or the prepared mind. I was lucky, and I obviously was showing people the kinds of things that I was interested in because I had people helping shepherd me again. And that was just a wonderful opportunity. And it's really in grad school where I started to understand a little bit more about, sort of the budding industry at the time.
Yeah. And as you say, it was a budding industry at the time. When did you make your first step into what you would call, I don't know, pharma or biotech corporate life? When did you actually first start working in an organization, and how much did you enjoy that first, out of university and into working life?
Yeah, so 1986 was when I joined Genentech, and I joined directly out of my graduate program. I had been considering postdocs and looked at several both industry postdocs as well as academic postdocs. And I got this call from Genentech based on somebody who had done a fellowship in the lab that I was in at University of Arizona. And it was crazy because, this is when you learn about the network, because I would have never even considered applying directly to Genentech. It was sort of like the beacon that you would hope to eventually find your way to, but wound up with an opportunity there and really took the risk of not doing a postdoc, which, in hindsight, I probably wished I had done a postdoc because it's a little bit of the box checking of your pedigree that makes advancement later a little bit more difficult. But it was just heaven. It was like, how can I actually get this opportunity? And so when I went, um, I was in the lab, but it was just immediately immersed in project teams. Never even heard of those when I was in university or in grad school. I mean, there were program grants that were integrated across departments, but it was very difficult to really imagine that things got done on a team basis. So that was great. The most equipment that you'd ever seen. I mean, it was unbelievable the technology you had at your fingertips, and you weren't scraping or asking to borrow somebody else's machine, or it was great. It was so exciting. So I was able to immerse myself in the science immediately and just have a great time. I mean, I had fun. I can't say any other word than I had a blast doing that. And I think that it was all for a good reason. You knew you were working on a medicine. You knew that you were working on a way to help diagnose kids with growth hormone deficiency. I mean, there was lots of different pieces to it that were just so exciting.
Yeah. And it's great because now we can talk as well. So you started in 1986, and obviously we're going to open up your career path and what you've done and all of those things that you've achieved later on in the discussion. But, you know, I think it's fantastic that we can now have a conversation that's going to span from 86 to 26.
Yeah. Yes, that makes me feel really old, but good.
Uh, yeah, exactly. But I also love the energy. You still, as we said before, previously in different discussions, you've still got so much positive energy for the industry that it's great to see. Some people, it kind of peters out, but for you, it seems like it's still a real kind of fire that's lit inside you. Um, how did you first move into leadership? I suppose before we get into some of the themes and topics for the discussion. So you're in there, you're working in this really cool lab. When did the first moment when you felt like a leader present itself?
Yeah, I think that there were a couple sort of steps along the way. One was in a very interesting, opportunity. My early days at Genentech, I was doing a lot of work that was supporting the sales force, if you can believe that. We had just launched growth hormone, and people who had, gene deletion didn't have growth hormone. If you administered growth hormone, they developed antibodies to the growth hormone, and you needed to be able to characterize those. And it was a very competitive environment for us with Eli Lilly, who was also working on growth hormone at the time. And we were constantly trying to explain different how things were different and the between the products that they weren't probably different, but we used to try and tell people why they were different. And so I got to actually work on training programs to help the sales force have a better, sort of story when they were out talking to the endocrinologists. And it was really a burden to sort of develop that. The data behind the things that we were going to have the sales force talking about, but then also helping the sales force understand what they could and couldn't say and how they should or shouldn't say it, and then sort of became an expert for them to be calling when things happen. People worried, are these antibodies too high? Why doesn't the growth hormone work anymore if these people don't have antibodies? There's all sorts of different things that we were able to help with. So that training part gave me a little bit of a hint of some leadership that I didn't necessarily have before. And then it was really the first time I was a project lead, and I was asked to lead a preclinical aspects of a project. And all of a sudden, you don't have any real line oversight of the people who are doing the work for you. You have to lead by influence. And you need to get things done. You know what needs to get done. You need to get people on board in order to get them done. You have timelines, you have a budget. And it was really by being a scientific program lead that I was able to sort of get the sense of, wow, I like this. This is interesting. This is productive. You get a lot more done when you have a bunch of people doing things than when you're sitting there trying to do it all yourself. So I think that project leadership, which I was fortunate enough to sort of be encouraged and mentored in that area by Mark Levin, who had been a project lead at Genentech when I first went there. And I just saw he was the first project leader I ever worked for. So I saw this really intensely interesting, energetic person getting everybody else to do stuff. It was quite remarkable. And I basically said, I can do that. So,
Yeah.
so I started, that's how it started out for me. So that, I would say that was my first foray into leadership.
Yeah, really nice. It's lovely that you've got the mentor that you can kind of observe, maybe take some good things, maybe not do everything that they do, but add some of that to your arsenal. I think that the project leadership, that kind of, as you say, leading through influence, gathering stakeholder engagement and, buy-in from people. But then also, as you said earlier, the training piece, it's that the narrative building, the almost like a entrepreneurial string to your bow quite early. So these are all fantastic foundation layers that would later serve you very well in your career. Yeah, I love those.
Yeah, it's interesting though. It's also you you don't know that those things exist sometimes when you go in about your career. It's not like you can point and say, I need to do that by year 6 of my career. You can anticipate that there's going to be growth, but you don't necessarily know what those growth opportunities are going to be. So you have to trust people that when they're asking you to do it, it's something that you should try. And then if there's something you're interested in, you also have to trust yourself to ask, can I try it? So
Yeah, yeah. And it seems as though you trust your instinct, because obviously you've been take these opportunities have presented themselves in different ways, and then you're somebody that obviously we spoke about that risk taking aspect. You don't hold yourself back when it comes to these opportunities.
now I'd say that that's true. It's an informed risk though. I've definitely honed that over the years, and there's some things that are there. It's not that they're too risky. They're in an environment that may be incompatible with how I work or how I think. And so sometimes I won't take a risk just because I understand that's not an environment that I can succeed in. It doesn't mean it's a bad environment. It's just not necessarily culturally correct for me, for example. And so that informed risk is a really important part of it, I think.
Yeah. And that informed risk has helped you become or helped you create what we spoke about previously being the biotech builder mindset. You know, you've gone from the scientist to the company builder. What was it about the early biotech world that pulled you in so strongly and really got that fire lit?
Yeah, that's a really good question because I think that in the early days, there was a sense of urgency to everything that biotech did. Biotech was solving problems that weren't solvable. So I'll give you two examples. One is with human growth hormone. Um, the growth hormone that was being purified from human pituitaries was contaminated with Creutzfeldt-Jakob virus, and a certain number of kids who were getting pituitary-derived growth hormone were getting these slow neurodegenerative viruses. And so the concept of recombinant technology being applied to something like that was, the FDA was on board with it. And the FDA had not really approved many of these protein drugs. So we had to help them. There was a whole process of helping people understand, but that urgency, those kids needed something other than this, right? They needed something other than the pituitary derived. And I think that drove a lot of it. It was, how do you use this technology? How do you bring people together? I always find it remarkable that the fermentation sciences that are required for biotechnology to make drugs, a lot of the people came out of the brewing industry. They knew how to ferment, they knew fermentation, right? So it's like bringing these disparate people together to make things happen. So I would say that urgency for the patients was one example, was the growth hormone. Another was during the AIDS crisis, the whole blood supply was contaminated with HIV. And kids were getting, who have hemophilia, either type A or type B, were getting those blood factors purified from blood. They were getting AIDS. And literally at one point in time, I think greater than 90% of the population with hemophilia also were HIV positive. And so the urgency and the drive to create these very complicated molecules, again, it's just a driving force. A lot of the other things, if you think about companies like Genzyme with these other neurological diseases and these enzyme, disorders, there was that constant pull of the patients need something. We have technology that can give them what they need. And people just rolled up their sleeves and worked.
Yeah. And what did that era of biotech teach you, I suppose, about the ownership, the pace and responsibility? Obviously, that's what brought you in. But then what was when you were in that moment and you were developing your career and moving up the layers, what did it teach you? How did you kind of put it all
Yeah,
into
I
action?
think that there's a good lesson about decision making on what's important, right? And so sometimes people can go off on tangents. Science is interesting and you follow, your nose sometimes. And I think that focus and prioritization and diligence of really working on what's critical is one of the things that I think, I sort of learned quickly. I also feel like the priority of unmet medical need is always something that is going to be out there, and doing the same thing that three other companies have done. It might be interesting. You might be able to do something better, but really innovating in areas where there's not a solution is just one of the most rewarding things to do. And I think that people rally in a much more um, passionate way when they're trying to do something that hasn't been done before.
Yeah. And would you say that starting as a scientist helped shape you as a leader rather than going through any kind of commercial track or anything like that first?
It's a great question because I think I got passive commercial training very early on, being involved with some of the stuff that was going on at Genentech, and then later on, especially when I was at Millennium, the sort of way we thought about portfolios, it was this science and business financial sort of integration, which was super helpful. I do think that the scientific method, if you will, how you look at a problem, how you derive solutions, how carefully you control an outcome, those things probably helped in the way I lead in science. I don't know that those would be helpful if I led in another industry, but I definitely feel like knowing the science and having it in my blood, if you will, allows me to be a bit more empathic about what's going on as we're trying to, discover and develop these drugs and even commercialize them.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And here's a question. So, do you think, because you came through with such um, it was such an embryonic time, there were lots of cool companies popping up, and there was a lot of things happening simultaneously with your like peer group, even if they were in different companies in different parts of the world. Do you think that leaders who built biotech have a different mindset to those that perhaps have inherited it?
Um, the quick answer is yes. I do think there was a slightly different mindset then than there is now. I think that the intensity of you know competitive processes to win, if you will. There wasn't as much of that then, so that there was this intensity of the science and this intensity of building the technology, making sure it's right, really diving into the relationships that would, you know, with the FDA or other health authorities that would really sort of have shared accountability for whether these things were successful. Nowadays, it's a little bit more of that you take that all for granted. And there, it's a little bit of how can I just take all of this sort of prefabricated process and plug in my idea. So we had to use a term that a lot of people use. We had to build the plane while we were flying it. And I think now there's a lot more, okay, I just want to fly this plane to this destination.
Yeah. So obviously extremely rewarding for you though to be part of that moment with that peer group that all came through at the same time and were building multiple planes while they were all flying.
Yes, in the
Must have
same
been a great
direction
time.
or different directions, who knows?
Yeah, exactly. And because I love it that now there's still, so much energy as well from you and people that were also coming through there. There's almost like a resistance to retire.
Yes.
Okay. Whereas there's actually a group that maybe have inherited some parts of the industry where they are looking to retire maybe slightly earlier and move into a portfolio career or like trying to get out the corporate world and climb that second mountain of career advisory earlier. So it's been quite an interesting, shift between that generation between you and those that have come after.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that I'm a boomer, and we all are, sort of. Everybody knows what the baby boomers grew up with, which was, you know, great hope and a lot of tools to do things that our parents maybe didn't have, but we had parents who wanted us to succeed. And I think we took that into our culture of when we built companies, when we built businesses, how we thought about, moving things forward. And it was just, you never stop building. You keep going. It's not a question of, oh, when am I going to make this title? It's like, when can I push this sort of project far enough? And once I do, I'll get rewarded for it. And then I'm going to push it again, and then I'll get rewarded for it. And so that concept, I think, was something that we never get enough of. I think we're never, really completely satisfied. You talk to boomers who have recently retired, and they're on 16 boards and running 3 not-for-profits. It's just that drive just doesn't really go away, I think. Whether that's healthy or not, I can't tell you, but it's certainly something that a lot of us have in common. When I look at subsequent generations, I do see a little bit of, more of the sort of plotting out, if you will, of their trajectory, and understanding that they want to get to certain points in time, or certain goals in a certain, point in time. And then when they're done, they're done. And we've found that it is hard to continuously recruit people who have the scope of skills that we think are necessary in order to build companies. And there's a lot of company builders who are unbelievably brilliant. They've seen 1 or 2 things, but they haven't seen 4 or 5 things. And so the question is, do they have what we call the pattern recognition? Do they understand this is what a good drug looks like? This is what a, questionable drug looks like. Do they have the pattern recognition about what risks you should take? And I think that with the, earlier, sort of life cycle of biotech, you had all this analytical thinking, integrated with all of this sort of technology and engineering. And now people are very focused a bit more on the financial side of things. It's like, is this going to create value for investors? Which is important. But I don't think many of us thought about that in the early biotech days. And so I just don't know that the boomers were as focused on that aspect of success as some of the generations now are focused on.
Yeah, and it almost came with the success of being, of getting the industry right first time round. All, as you said earlier, you'd get all of those milestones, those things would happen, but it wasn't the driving goal of what you were trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's an intention, right? Our intentions were a little bit different. And I hate to be generational like that. And I know that if my children ever hear this, they're going to be rolling their eyes. But it's just there was an intention of what we did, as opposed to just seeking opportunity, right? It's like create opportunity versus seek opportunity.
Yeah, as someone though that owns a headhunting firm in life sciences, we are seeing the gap. We are seeing it, and there are more people looking for freedom careers earlier. So we're seeing that the average kind of retirement age is coming down in the industry, or people that are moving out of the corporate world and taking on different challenges and multiple challenges in their mid to late 50s. That's what people want to do. They're financially secure, they want to make their families happy, they want to be, whatever it is, that they're being more, as you said earlier, they're plotting it out and they're sticking to it. Whereas I think with the boomers, there's still so much energy. I absolutely love it. um, Now, one of the things though that is quite interesting is at that time, and subsequently as you've grown and developed your career, you've had to kind of let go of certain aspects in order for the organizations that you're in and for yourself and your skills to scale. So when did you realize that letting go of execution, the leadership, almost like requirement and not just a luxury?
Yeah, I think that was probably pretty early on for me in the maybe even in the first couple of project leadership responsibilities that I had. Your tendency to want to dive into the data and get your hands on it, and double check it and triple check it and graph it 6 different ways. You love doing it, right? That's a joy for a scientist. That is our candy, if you will. It's like sitting down and plotting your data, but that's not your job anymore, right? And if you're doing that, then you're not doing your job. And if you're doing that, then you're not letting somebody else do their job. So the people who you've hired to, really take on that, technical responsibility or scientific responsibility, you have to give them that runway. It's that you hired them because they know something probably a lot more than you do, basically, and let them do it. And then flip it over. You have to be overseeing a collection of things in order to make something, in an integrated way come to fruition. And if you're deep into one place, you're not going to be effectively leading across the entire scope of the things that you're responsible for. And I think you learn that pretty quickly when you are sort of seeing the tension between the people who are creating the data and you, if you're asking to see it all the time, and you're seeing the tension of people saying, hey, wait, when are you going to make this decision? And so I think it was pretty obvious, but it's also very intentional. It is very intentional. And I will say there's leaders who have not learned that yet.
Yeah, yes, I agree. But also, it's like understanding sometimes um, that you have gaps in your own knowledge, skill set, whatever it might be, and then it's building around those gaps with complementary people within your organization. And you did that obviously very well. Can you give us some examples of where that kind of really hit off for you?
Yeah, I think that I have had phenomenal teams throughout my career. I mean, phenomenal, and really people that I just can't imagine the synergy that we had, really being greater than the sum of the parts. Um, so there's so many of them that I don't want to single any out. But I will say when I first took on the challenge of leading Taliesin, which was my first CEO gig. And in a very risky biological area of complement modulation back in early 2000s, which is a little different than now. We know a lot more about it. Um, but we needed a very specific technology competencies, and we needed specific biology competencies, and we needed very specific drug development competencies. And we were able to bring a group of people together who almost never agreed on anything. Eventually we got there, but that was actually the magic, is that everybody had such expertise and such commitment into what they're doing that it was my job then to make sure that they understood that they were actually agreeing with each other, or they were doing what needed to be done to win. And so for me, in hindsight, when I reflect on that, it was just an amazing collection of individuals who could do both. They could work on their domain expertise with absolute commitment and focus. And then they learn to sort of flip over and see the collection and act as a team and not act as a collection of individuals. So it started that way, sort of individuals, and it wound up with this real team dynamic that for me was the best of both worlds. The unbelievably amazing technical competence, but then the ability to understand and respect each other's contributions and know that you're not going to bring those. So you better, sync up with the people who can.
Yeah, and then you've gone on, like since then, over the next 20 odd years, to continue to have really good peer mentorship. Okay, so you also giving mentorship, but receiving it. Why did that remain so important, even at the most senior levels, even now? Like,
Yeah,
you know,
daily.
you, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
You seem to really understand the importance of your team around you and how that they can actually make you better at your job.
Yeah, I think that it has a lot to do with really being very comfortable with what I know and what I don't know. There's areas where I know I am the expert who can bring that into a room. And then I know that there's, zillions of areas where I am not an expert, but I need that expertise to make the decision that I want to make, or to, sort of enable something. And I just have never had any trouble thinking about things as a team sport. It really is a very important thing. There's also, this is kind of a weird one. Let me see if it resonates with you. At one point in time, I think somebody was interviewing Lance Armstrong, and they asked him whether he was motivated to win or motivated not to lose. And that's been in my head now ever since I heard it. So everybody that I talk to, you know, are you motivated to win? Or are you motivated not to lose? I am motivated not to lose. I will, whatever. It's like, I just don't want to lose. But I'm not driven by the win in the sense of, oh, if I lost, no big deal, but I'd rather win. Right. And so I feel like I reduced my chances of losing by surrounding myself and asking advice and stretching well beyond the boundaries of, even my current network, always looking to bring new people into my network. And also respecting that there's scientific training now is so different than it used to be, and technology is so different that there are so many young, amazing people who know things that I will never know. Never know. And so you have to find a way to be integrated with people across the spectrum of their careers.
Yeah, it's so interesting on that as well. Win or not to lose. I'm definitely in the not to lose gang because the loss hurts me longer because I win and then I'm like, what's next?
Yeah, it's like, yeah,
It's
exactly.
fleeting. It's like,
Yeah,
but then when I sit with the pain of the loss, whatever it might be, I'm like, yeah, this hurts.
yeah,
I don't want this again.
yeah, yes, exactly.
It's
That's
funny.
right.
Yeah, I'm now navigating that with my children as well. I've got young children that are all sports fanatics that I've got different ones that enjoy sports in different ways, one that's extraordinarily intense and will not lose. But when they do, I think the whole of our local village can hear the tears
That's right.
and the crying. But yeah, okay. So you're thank you for that. You're giving me some real good insight here into the importance of surrounding yourself with good people. You've got good judgment in, who those people are. Um, but let's talk about the kind of the CEO gig because that's when you've got a really big opportunity to kind of stamp your authority on an organization of what great biotech leadership really looks like. And you and I have spoken before about the CEO not being the like smartest person in the room, but the CEO should act like the MC. So what does that mean in practice for the listeners?
Yeah, I think that the way the analogy sort of scales for me is that, you surround yourself with stars, right? As the leader, as the CEO, I want every single person I hire to know more than I do. I want them to be more expert in every area. I want them to be, networked like crazy. I just want them to be superstars. And it's my job to make sure as the CEO that those superstars know how to work together, understand what the goals and objectives are, and, can work in a way that they create magic. But as the CEO, I know at the end of the day, decisions have to get made. And there's incremental decisions that you want your folks to be fully empowered to make. But at the end of the day, the really hard ones, I have to be able to make it. And, so if it's really sort of how's the whole thing coming together? All right, it's not coming together. We need to start over. Or this is, let's keep going. Let's push harder. Let's go. Let's go. I'll tell you when enough is enough, but let's keep going. So that's what I mean by that, sort of MC is that they're making sure the show is perfect. They're, sort of, they know enough about everything to sort of bring it together, but they're building the trust with people so that they can be all they can be. But at the same time, I'm going to make sure that the show works out okay.
Yeah, but sometimes the CEO wants to be the star of the show.
And I think that's a trouble time. I think that that's, to be honest with you, I think that it's really important that the CEO has the charisma, the storytelling capabilities, the intuition, the experience to recognize all that needs to be recognized. But they need to step back and understand that they can't do this alone, and therefore they have to make their team as successful as possible. They have to make each member of their team feel incredibly important. And if they're constantly sort of out looking to grab the spotlight, they're going to potentially be missing opportunities to be motivating some of the superstars that can actually deliver the goods.
Yeah, it's that mix of like, inspirational, assertive, confidence, but then also with humility.
Absolutely. And that's a hard balance sometimes, right? But the thing about that is, I go back to it's too hard. What we do in biotech, in pharma, in drug development in general, it is so hard and so much of it fails. And it doesn't fail because people don't know what they're doing. The science is just hard and the human body is pretty complicated. So you never know what you're really getting into. And so if you don't have the humility about those things, if you don't go in knowing how hard it is, but on the flip side, if you don't have the confidence that breakthroughs are possible and the right science done in the right way and brought together at the right time, it's transformational. So this is, you got to have that confidence to go in and fight that battle every day, but you have to have the humility to understand how challenging it is and help the people who you work with understand that challenge so they don't become demotivated or they don't become frustrated, or God forbid, they become reckless or sloppy in what they're doing. Right. So it's just it's a delicate balance, but one I think that once those of us who've been CEOs and have been successful, that's the magic. When you feel that balance, then you feel confident that you can really move into taking on that leadership role. And quite frankly, taking on the risk of, taking other people's money to, to make the science work.
Yeah, yeah, because somebody said to me once that there's some great science out there with, and they use the term crap leaders, but great science with crap leaders, but then there's some crap science with some great leaders, and sometimes the great science doesn't make it, but the not so good science does because the leaders can get it to that next stage. So it is really interesting how you can get that humility and conviction to coexist and for it to work and be successful. That's the really interesting thing. So what to you, Abbie, does a truly like integrated leadership team look and feel like?
Yeah, I think that, without speaking about the very specific domain expertise that goes into a fully integrated leadership team, because of course that's different at different phases of a company, right?
Yeah,
It's, very early on, the leadership team is going to be heavily science based. And then as you move along, you're bringing in completely different business minded, sort of strategy and finance and commercial, legal, all sorts of things. Not that those things aren't important in the early stages. It's just that when you're building a company, you're being sort of thoughtful in how many people you're putting into a leadership role based on what you're trying to accomplish at that stage, right? So, but I think that what integrated really means is that whatever scope of responsibility you have at that period of time in the life cycle of the company, whatever that company is trying to accomplish, at the leadership level, you have enough domain expertise to make the decisions that are necessary to move things forward. Whatever it is, whether you're trying to move a product forward, whether you're trying to move a platform forward, you at that team level, there has to be enough expertise that you can successfully make the decisions that need to be made. You don't have to have all the domain expertise on that leadership team, but you have to have leaders who know how to get that domain expertise, know when it's necessary, know when it's good. And so when that team comes together and respects that we're not leaving any gaps in what we're trying to do, and we're trusting each other to take on the responsibility for all of those things, that integration of, okay, I'll do this, you guys do that, I'll cover this, that kind of shared leadership, collective leadership, whatever you want to call it, is really critical. It's really critical for success. If you have a leadership team where people are fighting to be the one in control, maybe not fighting with the CEO, but fighting to be number two or fighting, then you wind up with people competing with each other in an unhealthy way. It's always good to have a little competition. All of us want to be, sort of driving ourselves. But when you get that unhealthy competition, it's toxic. And so you cannot have toxicity in a fully integrated leadership team. And I think that when you get much more mature and you have the benefit of even more really, experienced leaders who've seen a lot joining a leadership team. Oddly, sometimes they grow too big, and you need to then make the decision to shrink them down into the core that is going to be able to share the leadership decision making. So I think that that's a mistake that sometimes gets made, is when they grow because you need to add certain kinds of expertise and talent, you're sometimes losing the effectiveness of that team, and you need to sort of constrain it again.
Yeah, yeah, and then you've got, as you say, that smaller core group that they can then go back into their teams to get information that they need, but the decision nucleus is much smaller and more combined and more together. Okay. So is this giving you like a much clearer vision now on the future of biotech leadership? Because now you've gone scientist, operator, CEO, now you're in the investment sphere. Okay, so you've got a really good viewpoint on all parts of, you've got rare perspective of the full life cycle. You've seen some really good growth across the years. What do investors, I suppose, most often misunderstand about operators and leadership teams? Where's that kind of friction coming from, or challenges?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If you think about board dynamics, for example, where you have a board made up of primarily investors, and those investors have very different backgrounds. Some are young and have just been in finance, some have been previous operators like myself, and some have dabbled a little bit. Maybe they did a little operating and then said, no way, I'm going to go over here. And what you immediately see is that there's a tension between, really wanting to make a decision super quickly, whereas with the people with more operating experience, there's a few more experiments that need to be done. There's a few more things that need to be seen. You don't really have the data to make a decision, right? There's there's this book called, I think it's called Wait, and it talks about the, benefit of, elite tennis players being able to wait just that extra nanosecond before they hit the ball. And that's the difference between the spin, that's the difference between the placement, it's all of that. It's kind of the same way. We have to be able to give ourselves time to make the right scientific decisions, the right technical decisions. And it takes sometimes a little bit more time. But when there are investors who have not been operators, it's sometimes difficult for them when things start to get a little bit dicey to wait. They're like, okay, I really don't want to wait. I want to make this decision now. And if we wait too long, that's the kiss of death. And that's true. And so the art is to know you've got one more experiment wait time. It's not 12, it's one. And so that to me is something that I think we're losing a little bit in the way that the industry is being led right now. It's so execution oriented that you're not necessarily taking the time to sort of step back and say, are we on the right direction? Or have we taken this, let's solve this problem. Let's not just move on because it's a problem. Let's solve this problem. And I think that there's just not necessarily a lot of appetite to take that extra time sometimes.
Yeah, and is that why you think it's important to ensure that there are, or that there is enough operator experience on that, either in that investment committee or on that board, so that there is just that little pause moment before too much action?
Personally think it's critical. I personally think that it's a game changing differentiator when you have a team that is balanced. Because I also have great respect for the people who can think differently about investments from shaping those and even looking and saying, okay, you guys have taken this time thing a little bit too long. That balance is wonderful to have. It's when that's out of balance that I think management teams become incredibly frustrated with boards because they're either feeling micromanaged or ignored. And then all of a sudden, when there's, some sort of challenging time or a decision to be made, now all of a sudden the board is in their face going, come on, come on, come on. And they're like, where have you been all along? So
And what do you think the best investor slash CEO relationships have in common? Because obviously we've spoken broader about boards there, but what about just the one particular individual with the investors?
So just to clarify, you're asking about the relationship between the investor and the CEO? Or
Yes.
yes, okay. Um, so I go back to trust. I think that if you don't trust the CEO, if the investor doesn't trust the CEO, it's a disaster. And if that doesn't happen for whatever reason, even if the CEO did nothing wrong, you have to correct that problem. And that's a hard thing to do, but the chemistry might just be wrong. And let's face it, there a lot of this is about chemistry between the investors and their CEOs. This is one of the reasons a lot of times you'll hear, we're not going to invest in that company until we know who the CEO is. And that's kind of fair. We had a model for a long time where we went in as the interim operators and then we hired the CEOs. That worked out well when we were the only investors because we kind of trusted that. But once we started to syndicate our early investments a little bit more after our fourth fund, then we started to see that no, people needed to know before they came in, they needed to know who the permanent CEO was going to be. And that needed to be a fit for everybody. So I think that that trust is really critical. There's also people who are more inclined to really think, okay, is this CEO going to be able to manage Wall Street or manage the investor syndicates? Or other times it's, is this CEO more sophisticated about R&D and commercial? And different companies at different times need somebody a little different, but you will see that different investors have a different sort of bias as to what they think the optimal CEO really needs to be. And so I think that that's just something you have to work through. That's not wrong or right. That's just, what's the culture of that company? What's that company trying to achieve? And how do you best, what's the best phenotype for a company at that stage?
Yeah. Culture, chemistry, experience of being lived it, seen it, but it ultimately comes back to the first active ingredient of leadership that you said at the beginning, trust.
Yeah, it's
You
it's
know,
it's key. It's absolutely key.
it is. Yeah. I mean, you have given us so much today. I would love to now be able to switch lanes slightly and understand a little bit more future focused with a um, with an eye on life sciences. What excites you most about where biotech is heading now after a couple of turbulent years? What's the most exciting part for you?
Yeah, I think that I'm getting, the feeling that we are getting closer to being able to accept a little bit more risk and go to a little bit earlier innovation again. I mean, I think for the last at least 3 or 4 years, it's all been on, has the program been de-risked and now we can invest in it. And that put a lot of pressure on the universities. And they are not cut out for de-risking the way pharma needs to de-risk. And enter China. And they basically created a lot of assets that people could just pick up and take forward. But I am seeing at least conversations that are saying, yeah, we really need this kind of technology in order to take us forward to the next level, in order to answer these next questions. We're seeing things like in vivo CAR T or in vivo editing starting to work, but think about the years that that took, but think about that value. So I think people are starting to say, okay, that innovation pays off. We're going to have to make some investment in that innovation in order to have it available to us in the future. So I do think that I'm not going to say we're going to go back to these giant platform companies that get sold to pharma and then never do anything. But I do think that we're trying to inch back into early innovation. The other thing that I would say is that our relationship with academia is changing. It's changing partially because the financing of academia has changed. And I think that there's an increased willingness on academia's part to work earlier with industry to get their technologies out the door. And that makes it a much more synergistic relationship as opposed to it used to be a little bit of a, how much do these founders want and how much does the university want and how hard is this going to be to get this technology out and how far along is the technology really going to be. But I'm starting to see a little bit of that, a new kind of relationship building that I'm very optimistic about. So I do think we're going to get back into the innovation game. I think that we're going to take a great advantage of our colleagues in China. We have to find synergy there, and I think we have. And so I think that where we are, sort of in US and Europe is really in a very good position to be driving a lot of the early innovation.
Yeah, nice. Love it. And what about the future of leadership? What qualities do you think are going to define the next generation of biotech leaders? Because there's going to be a vacuum. It's coming. We're already starting to see it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that a quality that probably should have been mentioned earlier is resilience. So I do think that one of the things that I think we need to get back to is leaders who've been there, done that, and do have the resilience. So I do think there was such a gap in the availability of leadership sort of in the post-COVID stage that people without the right experience were just getting moved into jobs. And they might have gotten lucky and sold a company, and then everybody said, okay, they're a great CEO, where the reality is time and place, right? So I do think that there is a recognition that you need, the leaders with enough experience that they have that resilience and they have the sort of confidence to make the key decisions. So it's a little bit of let's go back and take these super young, super smart people and start to cultivate them a little bit more, into that kind of leadership. I think it's going to cultivate faster. It's not going to take the 20 to 30 years it took the boomers. But I think there's more intentionality to looking for those traits in our future leaders.
Lovely. Thank you. And then final question. What advice would you give to the next generation of leaders looking to build and scale companies in life sciences?
Yeah, I think that I would surround myself by people who've done it, have advisory partners, have, board members, have, however you want to do it, but don't don't make assumptions that you know what you're doing when you scale because there's lots of things about scale that people don't understand. And so I think that do surround yourself with people who've been there, done that. I also think that if you're fortunate enough to find yourself in a leadership role that is that exciting, but you don't necessarily have all the right experience, your executive leadership team has to be your thought partners. They have to be the people who you trust and that know something, maybe complementary to what you know, and you need to use them. And you need to convince them that it's better for them to be in this company in a number two role or number three role than going off and looking for their own CEO job, because you really do need to find people who are that experienced if you aren't. And that's a little bit of a challenge. So I just feel like we have a gap in the number of people who are willing to, sort of take the long haul to get into these roles. And so we're going to have to find ways to really sort of quickly shore people up so that they have multiple successes so that they then become much more independent in their leadership, but that they're sort of helped along the way.
Yeah, brilliant. Abby, thank you ever so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed today. It's gone super quick. We've covered some amazing topics here. I've really, really enjoyed it, and I know that our listeners will. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you very much for today, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Well, thank you. And thanks for the provocative questions and for reminding me I'm old but still active. So,
Boomer energy. I
yeah,
absolutely love it. Cheers,
great.
Abby. Thank you.
Thanks.